The words sliced through the air like sharpened knives, piercing my chest and shattering, in seconds, years of patience and unconditional love. The fork trembled in my right hand as my eyes locked onto Beatrice's contorted face. My daughter-in-law glared at me with the purest contempt I had ever witnessed in my life. The aroma of the shrimp stew, which moments before had warmed my heart with sweet childhood memories, now tasted bitter in my mouth. The ensuing silence was deafening, only the sound of rain lashing against the windows of the modern chalet she'd insisted on renting, far from everything I knew and loved. Mark, my son, remained motionless, his eyes fixed on his plate, as if the potatoes and shrimp could offer him an escape from this moment of utter embarrassment. His hands, which I had held so many times as a child, now trembled imperceptibly as he twirled his fork in mechanical, futile movements. I could sense his internal struggle, torn between loyalty to the mother who raised him alone and love for the wife he had chosen to share his life with. Anna, my 15-year-old granddaughter, sat at the end of the table, her eyes wide with shock. I saw the exact moment when the innocence in her gaze transformed into something more mature, more painful, the understanding that the adults she trusted were capable of cruelty. Her cheeks flushed, and she lowered her head, as if the shame were hers. Heat rushed to my face, an explosive mixture of humiliation and contained fury that made my heart pound dangerously. At 62, I had survived so many storms: the premature death of my mother, the abandonment by my husband, decades of hard work raising Mark alone, but nothing had prepared me to be reduced to old woman and silenced by the woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms. That's when everything crumbled inside me. For 40 years I built my life around a single certainty: unconditional love for my son. From the day he was born, with those curious eyes that seemed to see through my soul, I dedicated every breath, every thought, every heartbeat to ensuring he had everything I never could. I grew up in a village forgotten by progress, where adobe houses lined up like crooked teeth along a dirt road that only saw asphalt in distant dreams. My mother, Cecilia, died when I was only 11, leaving me in the care of my father, Severino, a man with calloused hands and a broken heart who never fully recovered from the loss. He disappeared when I was 17, leaving only a confusing letter about debts and interrupted dreams, forcing me to grow up too soon and learn that survival sometimes demands more courage than strength. At 19, I met Robert, Mark's father. He had an easy smile and even easier promises, speaking of a bright future in the big city where we would be happy forever. For 3 years I believed those words like a child believes in fairy tales. When Mark was born, I thought I had finally found my place in the world. We were a family, imperfect but ours. Robert left one Monday morning when Mark was only 2. There was no argument, no dramatic explanation. I simply woke up, and he was gone, leaving only a note on the nightstand saying he wasn't born to be a father and that it would be better this way. I remember standing in the doorway of the bedroom, clutching that paper with trembling hands, while Mark played on the living room floor, oblivious to the fact that our lives had changed forever. In the years that followed, I worked 3 different jobs to keep our small house and ensure Mark had everything he needed. In the mornings I cleaned offices in the city center. In the afternoon, I sewed clothes for neighbors. At night, after he fell asleep, I made sweets to sell at school. My hands were permanently stained with fabric dye and sugar, but my heart overflowed with pride every time I saw Mark grow, intelligent, kind, determined. He graduated from engineering with top marks in his class. On graduation day, sitting in the front row of the auditorium, I cried like I had never cried before. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a joy so profound it felt physical, as if every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I skipped so he could eat better, had been worth it at that exact moment. It was 2 years after graduation that Mark introduced me to Beatrice. She arrived at our house one Sunday afternoon, wearing an expensive dress and shoes that cost more than I earned in a month. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny that: perfectly brushed blonde hair, impeccable makeup, manicured nails. She spoke authoritatively on subjects I barely understood, used English words in the middle of her sentences, and always seemed to be analyzing everything around her with critical eyes. From the first meeting, I felt a tension in the air. Beatrice looked at our simple house, our old furniture, my homemade clothes, with an expression I had learned to recognize over the years, contempt disguised as politeness. She smiled when she spoke to me, but the smile never reached her eyes. She asked questions about my work, my family, my past, but always in a tone that made me feel as if I were being interrogated for a crime I hadn't committed. Mark was in love. His eyes shone when he spoke of her. His hands gestured animatedly as he recounted their dates at fancy restaurants, the trips they planned. I saw my son transforming, adopting more refined tastes, speaking differently, subtly distancing himself from the simple world we had built together. I tried to be happy for him. I tried to see in Beatrice the woman who had won my son's heart, who made him happy in a way I never could. But each family gathering became an ordeal, where I had to swallow condescending remarks about country folk and old-fashioned ways, always delivered with a smile that didn't disguise the venom behind the words. The wedding was held at a 5-star hotel in the state capital. I wore the only party dress I owned, a navy blue suit I had bought for Mark's graduation, and felt completely out of place among Beatrice's elegant guests. Her parents greeted me with cold politeness, her friends ignored me completely, and throughout the ceremony, I felt like an intruder at someone else's party. Anna was born a year after the wedding. When I held her for the first time, with that perfect little face and those tiny fingers clutching my index finger, I felt my heart expand in a way I didn't know was possible. She was my granddaughter, my blood, the continuation of our story. For a few months, I thought Anna would be the bridge that would finally connect me to Beatrice. After all, we were two women who loved the same child, but Beatrice had other plans. Gradually, she began to limit my visits. At first it was practical matters. Anna was sick, they had appointments, it was better if I called before coming over. Then came the subtle rules about what I could or couldn't do with my own granddaughter. I couldn't give her candy because it wasn't healthy. I couldn't tell certain stories because they were inappropriate for a modern child. I couldn't teach her the songs I used to sing to Mark because they were old-fashioned. And if you're following this story and feeling the pain I felt, if you're seeing your own life reflected in these moments of silent injustice, know that you are not alone. There's much more to discover about how I found the strength to face this situation, and I invite you to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving stories like this, stories of women who refused to be diminished. Little by little, I was pushed to the margins of Mark's life. He still visited me, still called me, still kissed me on the cheek when he arrived, but there was a new distance in his eyes, a hesitation in his words. I realized he had learned to see me through Beatrice's eyes, as an embarrassing reminder of a past that was better forgotten. The situation worsened when Beatrice landed her dream job at a multinational company, and they moved to their modern chalet. It was a beautiful place, I couldn't deny, all glass and wood, with a mountain view, decorated with designer furniture that cost more than my entire house. But it was cold, impersonal, soulless. The white walls had no family photographs, the leather sofas had no handmade throws, the gleaming kitchen didn't smell of home-cooked food. For months, I only visited when explicitly invited, always feeling like a stranger in that antiseptic environment. Beatrice received me with forced courtesy, offered coffee in porcelain cups I was afraid of breaking, talked about work, traffic, the weather, anything to avoid personal conversations. Anna grew up before my eyes, becoming more like her mother every day, speaking perfect English, attending private school, taking ballet and piano lessons. I felt myself disappearing. It was as if my own existence was being slowly erased, as if all those years of love and sacrifice meant nothing in the face of the sophisticated world Beatrice had built for my family. I began to doubt myself, to question whether I was being overly dramatic, whether I shouldn't simply accept my diminished place and be grateful for the crumbs of attention I still received. And then came that fateful night. Beatrice had invited me to dinner, a rare event that I interpreted as a sign that things might be improving between us. I spent the whole day preparing the shrimp stew, using the recipe my mother had taught me, the same one I had made for Mark on all his birthdays as a child. It was my way of bringing a piece of our past into that cold house, of showing that some traditions were worth preserving. During dinner, I tried to share stories from my childhood, sweet memories of my mother, and how we had learned to turn limitations into creativity. I talked about Cecilia, who invented verses to make us laugh when there wasn't money for toys. I talked about Severino, who worked from sunrise to sunset but always found time to teach me how to make ragdolls. I talked about how, even after they were gone, those memories gave me the strength to raise Mark alone, to transform our poverty into a wealth of love. I was lost in my own words, feeling my heart warm with the memories, when Beatrice's yell brought me violently back to reality. "Shut your mouth, old woman." Here we were, in the present, silence hanging heavy over the table like a storm cloud. I swallowed back the tears threatening to spill, straightened my shoulders, and rose from my chair with as much dignity as I could muster. I didn't say a word. I just looked at each of them. Mark, who still couldn't look up from his plate, Anna, who watched me with a mixture of shame and sadness, and finally Beatrice, who glared at me defiantly, as if expecting me to make a scene. But I didn't. I calmly walked to the kitchen, grabbed my purse and coat, and left the house without saying a word. The rain had stopped, and the night air was clean and fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in months that I could fully fill my lungs. That night, alone in my house, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went up to the attic. Among dusty boxes and old furniture, I found forgotten treasures, yellowed photo albums, letters tied with ribbon, diaries I had written in my youth. And there, amidst that archaeology of memories, I found the letter. It was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing pages covered with Severino's shaky script. It was the explanation I had waited for over 40 years. "My dearest Sophia," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to explain in person. I know my disappearance will cause you pain, and that breaks my heart, but you must understand that I am doing this for you, not against you." He explained about gambling debts he had incurred, about dangerous men who threatened him, about his fear that his presence would bring danger to me. But the part that touched me most was when he wrote about his interrupted dreams. He wanted to give me a better education. He wanted me to have opportunities he never had. He wanted to see me grow and become the strong woman he knew I could be. "There's a chest buried near the dry creek bed, behind the old house," he wrote. "Inside, you will find everything I managed to save for your future. Use it when you need strength, when the world tries to make you believe you are worth less than you truly are. You are Cecilia's daughter, who transformed words into magic, and my daughter, who never gave up fighting. You are stronger than you imagine." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not just smiled. I laughed out loud, alone in that dusty attic. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me the only way he knew how. And somehow, through that old letter, he was giving me strength exactly when I needed it most. The next day, I canceled all my appointments and traveled back to the village where I grew up. The place had changed, some new houses, a paved road, signs of progress that had arrived decades after my departure. But the essence remained the same, the kindness of the people, the simplicity of the relationships, the feeling of belonging to something larger than myself. Mrs. Margaret, now over 80, still lived in the house next to our old property. She greeted me with tears in her eyes, and a hug that lasted several minutes. "Sophia, my girl, how beautiful you've grown," she said, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly seen, truly valued. With the help of Mr. Joseph, the son of an old neighbor, we found the chest exactly where my father had indicated. Inside, besides some simple jewels that had belonged to my mother, there was another, far more valuable treasure, dozens of poems that Cecilia had written, carefully preserved in hardback notebooks. Reading those verses, I discovered that my mother had been a talented poet, who transformed life's difficulties into beauty through words. There were poems about motherhood, about hope, about the strength of simple women who build entire worlds with love and determination. There was even a poem about me, written a few days before her death, where she spoke of the strong daughter I would become, of the storms I would face, and of the light I would always carry within me. I returned home transformed, not only by the discoveries about my family, but by a newfound certainty about my own worth. I wasn't just the old woman who should shut her mouth. I was Sophia, daughter of Cecilia and Severino, mother of Mark, grandmother of Anna. I was a woman who had survived loss, abandonment, loneliness, and had raised a good and decent man. I was a woman with stories to tell, wisdom to share, love to give. During the weeks that followed, I kept my distance from Mark's family, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. I needed to reconnect with myself before facing that toxic environment again. I started attending a poetry group at the local library, where I read some of my mother's verses and wrote some of my own. The other women in the group, retired teachers, housewives, working women like me, welcomed me with warmth and respect. It was Anna who broke the silence. She appeared at my door one Thursday afternoon, her eyes red and her school backpack on her back. "Grandma," she said, "can I talk to you?" Inside the house, she told me about the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the cabin since that fateful night. Mark was quieter, Beatrice more irritable, and everyone seemed to avoid talking about what had happened. But what touched my heart most was when Anna said, "I miss you, Grandma. I miss your stories, your food, the way you make me feel special." I told Anna about my father's letter, my mother's poems, and the discovery that our family had always been made up of strong people who faced adversity with dignity. Her eyes lit up when she read some of Cecilia's verses, and for the first time in months, I felt I was passing something valuable on to the next generation. "Grandma," Anna said before leaving, "could you teach me to write poems like those?" That's how we started our weekly meetings. Every Wednesday, Anna would come to my house after school, and together we explored the world of poetry. She had a natural talent, she had inherited Cecilia's sensitivity, and the determination that ran in our veins. Within a few weeks, she was writing her own verses, some about school, others about friends, some about the complexities of being a teenager in a world that always seemed to be changing. What I didn't know was that Anna was sharing our meetings with her Portuguese teacher, Miss Helen, a middle-aged woman who immediately recognized the girl's talent. It was she who suggested that Anna participate in a school poetry contest, and it was Anna who had the idea of inviting me to go as her special assistant. On the day of the contest, I entered Anna's school with a racing heart. It was an environment I didn't know. Wide hallways, rooms with modern equipment, young people speaking different languages, and seeming to have access to a world I only imagined. But when Anna went up on the auditorium stage and began to recite her poem, a verse about roots that nourish flowers, I felt such immense pride that it physically hurt. The poem was about 3 generations of women: the great-grandmother, who transformed words into magic; the grandmother who transformed love into strength; and the granddaughter who was learning to transform both into art. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in applause, but my eyes were fixed on 2 figures I had noticed at the back of the room: Mark and Beatrice. They had arrived unannounced, probably alerted by Anna about the event. Mark's face expressed a mixture of surprise and pride: surprise at discovering his daughter's talent, and pride at recognizing the words I had shared with her over the years. But it was Beatrice's expression that caught my attention the most. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed genuinely moved, as if she were finally seeing value in the old stories she had so despised. Anna won first place in the contest. When she called me to the stage to share the trophy, I felt I was experiencing one of the most important moments of my life. There, before an audience of young people, teachers and parents, I wasn't just the old woman who should shut up. I was the grandmother who had helped nurture a talent, the woman who carried valuable stories, the bridge between the past and the future. After the ceremony, Mark approached with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, I didn't know that you and Anna were doing this together. I didn't know our family had this poetry history." Beatrice kept her distance, but I could see her observing the interaction between Anna and me, noticing how her daughter shone when she talked about our meetings, about the poems we had read together, about the stories I had shared. For the first time, she was seeing Anna through my eyes, not just as a child to be molded and directed, but as a complex person with deep roots and infinite potential. It was Anna who finally broke the ice. "Mom," she said, addressing Beatrice, "did you know that great-grandmother Cecilia wrote over 100 poems? And that great-grandfather Severino didn't abandon the family, but sacrificed himself to protect them?" Grandma told me the whole story, and it's incredible. What followed was a hesitant but honest conversation. Beatrice, for the first time, admitted that she had misjudged my family, that she had seen poverty where she should have seen a wealth of experience, that she had confused simplicity with lack of value. It wasn't an instant transformation, people don't change overnight, but it was a beginning. Mark, in turn, revealed how he had felt torn all those years, loving me but also wanting to fit into the world that Beatrice represented. I thought I needed to choose between you two, he confessed, but now I realize that was a mistake. You two are part of who I am. The real confrontation came 2 weeks later, during a dinner at their house, a dinner to which I was explicitly invited by Beatrice. She had prepared lasagna, not shrimp stew, but the gesture itself already represented an effort. Anna was radiant, Mark seemed more relaxed than he had been in months, and even the atmosphere of the house seemed less cold. It was during dessert that Beatrice finally said the words I had been waiting to hear. "Sophia," she began, her voice slightly trembling, "I need to apologize for what I said that night. It was cruel, it was unnecessary, and it was deeply unfair." She continued, explaining her own insecurities, how she had grown up in a family where showing emotion was seen as weakness, where personal stories were considered irrelevant in the face of professional achievements. "I envied your connection with Mark and Anna," she admitted. "I envied the way they admire you, how they light up when you tell your stories. I never learned to do that." "You can learn," I replied softly. "It's never too late to start building bridges instead of walls." From that day on, our family dynamic began to shift gradually. Beatrice started asking questions about my childhood, about Cecilia's poems, about the traditions I wanted to pass on to Anna.